I guess this is the appropriate place to talk about it, but to kind of mix electoralism with activism, just some ideas about, or not ideas, but examples of what Greens have done either through their activism or by getting in office. Well, I guess maybe even both, right? Being activists in office. Um, we had Jason West, who's a former Green mayor of New Paltz, New York, who was actually the first to officiate same-sex marriages before it was considered legal. So, this is a really powerful way that Greens can get in office and push for social change and push for social change before the Democrats and Republicans accepted it.
And be on the leading edge of issues.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
because he was mayor, he was a justice of the peace, and therefore allowed to marry people, right? And so he was in a position as a Green where he had the authority to marry someone, and it would be legal. And was able to then leverage that to push the issue to the forefront and start marrying, doing same-sex marriages. And, it was a kind of early volley, and what it, and when we look at how do we get same-sex marriage federally, it wasn't because the Democrats acted. Right? It was because of the Supreme Court. And it's never been federally protected by the Democrats, even when they had the power.
Right? Yeah, no, and actually, I like to, for perhaps the youth in the audience, I'm starting to get old enough that now I remember all this stuff, but just in case the youth in the audience who didn't know about past presidents and all, Barack Obama, the previous Democratic president before Joe Biden, he and Hillary Clinton, who were the two major nominees for the Democratic Party in 2008, 2012, they were against same-sex marriage until I think 2013. It was really not that long ago that Democrats were against this stuff. It was Greens that were leading the fight. It was people taking it to the Supreme Court that were leading the fight. It was not the Democratic Party.
And the thing that in 2008 that baffled me, I remember that election and fighting with liberal friends of mine. Barack Obama was a black man calling for separate but equal. That's what he advocated for, right? And he didn't change his mind until the politics were so overwhelmingly flipped that he didn't have a choice, right? And this is something you'll see with a lot of things, right? 94% of Democrats support Medicare for all, but the leadership doesn't. Joe Biden said he would veto it, right? And I know when post the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, somehow Joe Biden was rehabilitated into this champion for gay marriage, when in fact he supported Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He supported the Defense of Marriage Act. He was actively, as a member of Congress, as a member of the Senate, opposed to it and oppressing the LGBTQIA plus community, right? So this is one of the many issues that, despite how the Democrats posture today, the reality of their very recent history is far different. And it was actually, it was Greens and activists and movements that got this stuff done.
Yeah, this is what I meant on the previous slide about how Democrats will resist things until there's a social movement that pushes it, and then they swoop in and co-opt it, and they act like they were always on their side. And that is not true. We have to always hold their feet to the fire. We always have to keep the pressure up on them. And one way to do that is by being an independent Green Party member, right? So continuing with our list here, Gail McLaughlin, who was a former Green mayor of Richmond, California, made important policing reforms, and especially the thing I think is very interesting is use the power of eminent domain, which is very often used, unfortunately, to take property and give it to fossil fuel companies or something like that for private profit. Gail McLaughlin flipped that around and used eminent domain to seize housing and make sure that there was public housing for people to live in during the 2008 housing crisis, to make sure that people weren't evicted from their homes, that they still had places to live. And I think, again, that's another really great example of ways that we can use our power in even local offices, that Greens, can make a huge difference. And you're not going to hear about, in national media, the Green running for, a local mayor, for example. as opposed to Congress, right? Media focuses on things like Congress, but it was really important that we had a green mayor in a city like that to do something like this. It changed the lives for a lot of people. So there's a lot of power at these local offices where the Greens very often do win. So we have to keep that in mind, that we can win and change policy a lot to help people and grow the movement from those changes.
Yeah, I want people to pause and hear that again. They seized housing that was going to be foreclosed on from banks, right? That is a radical, revolutionary thing, and it kept people in their homes, right? And all it took was having a green mayor and a supportive city council, right? And so we can make huge impacts on people's everyday lives, without getting control of Congress or the presidency, which is not which is a long-term goal, right? But in the short term, we can have huge impacts, right? And in local races, the number of votes you need, the number of, the metrics of everything are much smaller and much more attainable. But I mean, the power of that, right? Like, people really need to think about, like, what a move that was, right? To take the property from the banks to keep people in their homes. And I've seen social movements like an organization called Action Now out of Chicago that actually goes to the banks and says, give us your abandoned properties because you don't actually want to maintain them. You're stuck with them because you foreclosed, right? But that's like a few steps below what Gail McLaughlin did, in Richmond. And it was such a powerful move at such an important time. That should have been, a rallying call. But politicians of both parties are beholden to these banks that are foreclosing on people. So, that it kind of became a one-off. But as Greens, we should always keep it in the back of our mind. That's the kind of stuff we can do if we're elected to local office.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't want to get held up on this slide too much, so I just kind of want to mention the last few bullet points here that, we've had Greens like the Reverend Edward Pinckey, who's fought against, local capture of local government by corporations. Politicians putting the corporation ahead of the needs of the people. Sherry Honkala was Jill Stein's running mate in 2012 as the Green Party's vice presidential nominee. And Sherry's still very active in Philadelphia, advocating for the homeless population or houseless population, and founded the Poor People's Human Economic Rights campaign that still does a lot of activism and organizing around that. And it's a really great organization if you want to look into it.
And when Sherry was running for State House a few years ago,
yes,
she was, part of her campaign was that if she was elected, her offices, including her office in the Capitol, were going to become homeless shelters, right? She was going to house people
until the state dealt with it. She was going to house people, right? Yeah, it was a really great slogan. And again, it would be
when
like,
we say people, that were repressed, it's not just us playing the victim. Multiple people went to jail for the shenanigans that were, happened when Sherry lost that race. Like, it was a write-in campaign because the state lied. They told Sherry's campaign they had everything she needed to be on the ballot, and then waited till the day after to say, "Oh, you didn't have this," right? So she wasn't on the ballot. So it was a write-in campaign. People were removed in that election. You couldn't write your own candidate in. You told the poll worker, and they put a sticker with the name, and then people were caught removing stickers and putting the Democrat on, right? And so, like, when we say we're repressed, I mean, we mean illegal stuff is done to make sure that Greens are kept off the ballot, right? Sherry was such a threat to bring, poverty and homelessness to the forefront that they literally people went to prison.
Yeah.
To stop her.
There were Democrats who were standing out front of poll places telling people that, oh, you can't write in Sherry. You're not allowed to do that. And all kinds of really misinformation. So, and yes, people did literally go to jail. So, but anyway, that's a whole other discussion. It does lead into the last point, though, that Jill Stein, after her 2016 campaign, launched a few lawsuits in a few states, including Pennsylvania, because of problems around voting. In Pennsylvania, we used all electronic voting machines that you couldn't audit. And so Jill Stein's lawsuit eventually ended in a settlement, at least in Pennsylvania, where we now have paper ballots. And thanks to COVID, we now have paper ballots that we can mail in. That was a thing you could never do before. It's really amazing to vote here in Pennsylvania now, but that was not true before, and that was not true until the Green Party, until Jill Stein and Greens in Pennsylvania sued to make that happen. It wasn't the Democrat governor that made it happen. It was us. In fact, he fought the lawsuit for years before finally settling and changing it. So, these are ways that Greens can make a difference. And so, keep these examples in mind. There, some examples, but there's plenty more.